In a world where the air we breathe is becoming increasingly more polluted, a silent epidemic is taking hold among America's children: childhood asthma. In this Austin Air feature presentation, we delve into the impact that air quality has on the prevalence and severity of asthma in children. Uncovering geographic locations where children are most at risk, we explore the complex web of comorbidities, and we investigate how the age of school buildings can play a role in exacerbating these conditions. But amidst this grim reality, we also shine a light on potential solutions, such as education programs, the use of air purifiers in schools, and the massive amount of funding that's available to make this a reality. Join us on a journey to understand the critical importance of clean air for our children's health and well-being. Asthma. It's a condition that affects millions of people worldwide, yet for some it remains shrouded in mystery. So to understand the prevalence of childhood asthma, let's first start with the question, what exactly is asthma? I spoke with Dr. Lynn Patrick, one of the founding directors of Environmental Medicine Education International, to help demystify this prevalent and sometimes puzzling health issue.
We have certain things called antioxidants that we usually think of as vitamins, but they're more than that. And the most prominent and the most important antioxidant is a protein called glutathione. And this is the main antioxidant for all mammals. All mammals make glutathione, and all mammals use glutathione to deal with toxicants that enter into the lungs and need to be either broken down or taken away by the immune system. So as we are exposed to more and more toxicants, and our body uses up these antioxidants to get rid of those toxicants, the levels in our entire body and in our lung lining drop. And that is a result as well of things that we breathe in, right? So the more toxicants we breathe in, the lungs literally become inflamed. And as the lungs become inflamed, the entryway into the lungs becomes swollen. And the more swollen the entryway is, and the more swollen the little alveoli, the little grape-like, very thin walled sacs of air in the lungs, the less air the body can get in, right? So the less air you can get into the lungs, and the less air you can take up through those alveoli. And as a result, two things happen. One, you're short of breath, obviously, right? But two, you are taking in less oxygen to your tissues, which has a systemic effect.
Childhood asthma is a chronic respiratory condition that affects millions of children in the United States. According to the CDC, asthma is one of the most common chronic diseases in children, affecting an estimated 6.2 million children under the age of 18. The prevalence of childhood asthma has been steadily increasing over the past few decades, with rates nearly doubling since the 1980s.
If we look at 2001, say, as a starting number, there were about 20 million people in the United States that have asthma. And I'm going to get into the kids in a little bit. Now we're looking in 2021 at about 24.7, so almost 25 million people. So it's gone up significantly. So we're looking at percentiles that, we're looking anywhere from 6 to almost 10% of the population being asthmatic. 7.7% is the average in 2021. When we look at kids, just kids, we're looking, it depends on the age, right? But let's say children up to about 15 years old. So both infants, toddlers, and adolescents, it's about 6%.
This trend is concerning, as asthma can have a significant impact on a child's quality of life and can lead to serious health complications if not properly managed, which is precisely what the American Lung Association set out to do when it developed 2 asthma education programs for schools: the Open Airways program and the Kickin' Asthma program. Here's Barbara Kaplan, Director of Nationwide Asthma Programs for the American Lung Association, to explain.
Open Airways for Schools is what we like to call the gold standard to asthma self-management education in schools. It has been around, it's one of the oldest asthma self-management education programs. It's designed for children ages 8 to 11, so kids who are in the 3rd to the 6th grade. It was first developed by researchers at Columbia University in New York City. So they piloted the program in public schools back in 1986, 87. The goal was to design a program to be delivered in schools because that was the surest way to reach all the children, regardless of their family situation or access to healthcare. So that's why they selected schools. We teach kids how to detect the warning signs of asthma. So this is really kind of their entree into asthma. So we help them really detect their warning signs, avoid triggers, and make decisions about their health. And the initial study was held, piloted in New York City public schools with a really diverse group of children, about 239 children from 12 different elementary schools in different parts of New York City, where the rates of asthma were unusually high at the time. They continue to be high. Children who completed the program, we found that they took more steps to manage their asthma, improve their school performance. They had fewer and less severe asthma episodes. So Kick-In Asthma is for our kids who are ages 11 to 16. This program was actually developed by some researchers in Berkeley, out in California. And they took the Open Airways for Schools program and they took the lessons to design them more in a way that was appropriate for our teen population. I think the biggest difference between Open Airways for Schools and Kick-In Asthma is the self-advocacy skills that we're teaching. Open Airways for Schools is taught in 6 40-minute lessons, and the Kick-In Asthma program is 4 45-minute lessons. We train on average about 500 new facilitators each year across the country. Your certification is good for 3 years. So currently we have over 2,000 facilitators across the country right now. And we are implementing in almost every single state.
The American Lung Association began its educational efforts in New York City schools because the rates of asthma were high there. What's also typically high in this region? Air pollution. This begs the question, is there a connection? According to research by the EPA, the National Institute of Health, and numerous other organizations, the answer is yes. And this is especially true in cities where particulate matter, ozone, and traffic-related emissions are high and income is low. I spoke with Leslie Vasquez from the advocacy group South Bronx Unite about the connection between asthma, air pollution, and income in her community. I also spoke with 11th grade local resident Lauren about what poor air quality looks like at her school and how it impacts students.
Mott Haven and Port Morris have a high concentration of polluting facilities that cause us to have poor air quality. And so our community has been impacted by air pollution with their health, and we need to address the fact that we have one of the highest asthma rates in the entire country. Mott Haven and Port Morris are the last 2 neighborhoods in the South Bronx. And within that small area, we have 60,000 residents, and we also have 4 power plants. We have 3 major highways circling our community. We have the entire Bronx's waste management directed to our area. We have tons of warehouses all located within the same location that rely on heavy truck traffic and just fleets going back and forth. And so the list goes on, in addition to the fact that we don't have enough green spaces and we don't have the proper resources and whatnot. And so that high concentration of polluting facilities in our area, the lack of air quality monitoring, and the additional injustices that just keep piling up is exactly why we started our project. you don't really escape poor air quality here in the South Bronx. Like once you're indoors, you get to experience the same kind of pollutants, if not worse. We've spoken to community members about indoor air quality and the pollutants that are most prevalent, especially within public housing developments like NYCHA, and just older buildings that don't have the proper infrastructure to provide clean air or a less toxic air is something that we've seen as a common theme within our community. So particles coming from construction within the building accumulates and creates a very small and fine dust. Asbestos is a common issue. Lead and mold is also a common thing, in addition to particulate matter and the gases and VOCs.
It's a really bad problem in NYC mainly because NYC has a lot of pollution and not clear air, so people can't like breathe. And like in my other school, there was like a lot of kids, especially like in the gym, like always getting sick. Like I had a best friend that he would like have asthma attacks. I remember one time like they called the ambulance on him and everything, and like they took him from the school to the hospital because he was having a bad asthma attack. Because a lot of kids miss school because their parents are like afraid of them like having an asthma attack in school and not having like their pump or stuff like that or medicine to deal with it in school.
It's well known that cities often have high levels of air pollution and corresponding asthma rates because of numerous factors. But is it just cities? Or are children in other geographical areas impacted too? Dr. Lynn Patrick explains what new research is showing.
So the highest number of people in the population who have asthma, we would think it's in the Northeast, right, where the air is dirtier, but it's actually in the Midwest. Why does the Midwest have more asthmatics than the Northeast, the South, or the Western part? And why is the highest prevalence of asthma now in rural areas, not in cities? There's some good data that's come out of Southern California, AKA the breadbasket of the United States, looking at proximity or closeness to an agricultural area and the prevalence of asthma. And there's a significant increase, like by 5 times, of risk for asthma in kids who live near agriculture. Now, you could assume that that might be related to dust in the air from agricultural activity. It could be related to many other things, but according to the studies, it's related to pesticide use. California is the only state in the country where you can document exactly how many pesticides are used at any given day during the year in any given county and even a smaller subsection of a county, right? So these researchers actually matched the use of pesticides so that seasonally, right, significantly increased prevalence during the period where pesticides were actually sprayed versus periods where pesticides were not sprayed. And then they looked at distance from that agricultural area, a mile, 3 miles, 5 miles. And depending on the wind, the distance could be as high as 5 miles away in terms of the spread, meaning the exposure to pesticides. Now, the CDC data that shows that there's a higher prevalence in the Midwest is not linked to pesticide use. That's just medical records for kids and adults. But it seems to be related to something because it's significant. It's not just, it was only 0.1%, so it's not significant. It was significant. I think that we have to, at some point, as healthcare providers, admit that indoor air pollution, which is greater than outdoor air pollution, even the EPA says that, as well as outdoor air pollution, is one of the factors that we need to directly address with our patients. Now, pesticides are found indoors in areas where they're sprayed, just like they're found in the outdoor environment, right? So the only reason I'm bringing this up is to help people become aware of the fact that pesticides are just as big of a component of indoor air exposure as they are outdoor air exposure. And I know that people are very kind of keyed in to the presence of glyphosate these days. Glyphosate is a pesticide. And the recent data that came out in a study looking at the amount of glyphosate in the urine, and this was just females, in the urine of females, was not just related to diet, but it was completely related to proximity to agriculture where glyphosate was likely used. So this was kind of a depressing study because it showed that you don't have control over your exposure if you live within 3 miles of an agricultural area. The study I was referring to, this study actually was a school study looking at the proximity of the school to the agricultural area and that 3-mile boundary. And so they were looking at what's causing the asthma. Is it just the fact that they're near a dusty agricultural area? Or is it something about what's used on those crops that they might be breathing in? And so that's why they looked at the seasonality. Clearly, when the pesticides were sprayed, that the kids were much more likely to have asthma. I think this would be a good moment to remember that children are not little adults. Per pound of body weight, they take in more and are exposed to more environmental pollutants than are adults. Why? They breathe more. Kids literally have higher respiratory rates than adults do. So I just want to, it's really important to remember that, because it then helps us remember why infants and children are more vulnerable to exposures than adults are.
Watch for part 2 of our docuseries tomorrow, where we take an in-depth look at how the age of school buildings impacts childhood asthma. We will also uncover the serious and often chronic comorbidities affecting asthmatic children.